The first bullet punched through the Humvee door 3 inches from Lieutenant Commander Okonkwo's head. He dropped below the window line as the radio exploded with overlapping voices, every one of them saying the same thing. Contact. Contact from the North Ridge. Contact from the east. They were boxed in on 3 sides with a cliff face behind them, and somewhere in the chaos of that frozen Afghan valley, 16 SEALs were about to become a statistic. But 2 kilometers away, on a mountain peak that did not appear on any mission briefing, a woman they had dismissed as a paper pusher was already settling her breathing. Master Sergeant Yolanda Achebe pressed her eye to the scope of her M110 and whispered the same words she always whispered before the world went quiet. "Forgive me for what I am about to do." 48 hours earlier, the Black Hawk had touched down at FOB Resolute in a cloud of dust and ice crystals. Yoli stepped onto Afghan soil for the 11th time in her career, though officially only 3 of those deployments existed in any record. The forward operating base sprawled across a plateau carved into the mountains of Kunar Province, a collection of plywood structures and concrete barriers that housed the most elite war fighters the United States could field. Joint Special Operations Command had pulled assets from every branch, and somewhere in that alphabet soup of units, Yoli had been assigned as an attached sniper element. The orders had come directly from Colonel Whitfield, and that fact alone had raised eyebrows across the task force. She shouldered her rifle case and started toward the operations building, her boots crunching on gravel still frozen from the night before. A young private first class struggled with a stack of supply crates near the landing zone, his grip failing as the weight shifted. Yoli changed course without thinking, catching the top crate before it could crush the kid's foot. "Easy there," she said. "Stack them lower next time. Your back will thank you in 20 years. The private's eyes went wide when he saw her rank and the sniper qualification patch on her sleeve. "Thank you, Master Sergeant. I did not realize they had female snipers here." Yoli set the crate down gently. "They do not. Officially." She left him staring and continued toward operations, already cataloging the base layout, the sight lines, the position she would choose if she ever had to defend this place. Old habits, the kind that kept you alive in places that did not exist. The operations center hummed with activity. Maps covered every wall, and a dozen specialist workstations monitoring drone feeds and communication channels. Yoli found the personnel desk and presented her orders. The sergeant behind the desk scanned the paperwork, then scanned it again. "Master Sergeant Achebe," he said slowly, "attached sniper element. Direct assignment from Colonel Whitfield." He looked up at her. "Nobody gets direct assignment from the colonel." "Nobody." Yoli kept her face neutral. "I am nobody then." A voice cut across the room like a blade. "That is exactly what you are." Chief Warrant Officer Brock Hensley approached with the confidence of a man who believed every space he entered belonged to him. He was thick through the shoulders, with a jaw that looked carved from granite and eyes that held all the warmth of a Kunar winter. Yoli recognized him immediately. 2 years ago, Fort Benning, a shooting competition meant to build inter-unit cooperation. She had outscored every male sniper in attendance, including him. He had not spoken to her directly that day, but she had felt his stare like crosshairs on her back. "Master Sergeant Achebe," Hensley said, pronouncing her name like it was something unpleasant he had stepped in. "I heard a rumor we were getting a female sniper attached to the task force. I told him it had to be a mistake. Clearly I was wrong about the mistake part." Yoli met his gaze without blinking. "Chief Warrant Officer Hensley, I remember you from Benning. You finished 9th that day, one spot behind the Air Force photographer who had never held a rifle before that week." The temperature in the operations center dropped 10 degrees. Specialists suddenly found their screens fascinating. The sergeant at the personnel desk developed an intense interest in his keyboard. Hensley stepped closer, close enough that Yoli could smell the coffee on his breath. "I do not know what connections you have, or what strings got pulled to put you here, but this is a combat zone. This is where SEALs and Delta and the best shooters in the world do real work. Not some dog and pony show where they hand out participation trophies to make quotas look good." Yoli did not step back. Every instinct said to stay calm, to play the game, to let the insult slide. But she had been letting insults slide for 15 years, and she was tired. "Chief Warrant Officer," she said quietly, "the men in this task force have a job to do. So do I. You can either help that happen, or you can stand in the way. But I should tell you something my grandmother said back in Lagos before I ever put on this uniform. And what is that? A lion does not concern herself with the opinions of sheep." Before Hensley could respond, a door opened at the back of the operations center. Colonel Jasper Whitfield emerged with a tablet in one hand and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He was 62 years old, with silver hair, cropped close, and the kind of bearing that made junior officers straighten their spines automatically. "Master Sergeant Achebe," he said, as if Hensley did not exist. "Good. You made it. Come with me." Yoli followed without a backward glance. She could feel Hensley's eyes on her the entire way. The colonel's office was sparse. A desk, 2 chairs, maps on the walls, and a single photograph of a unit Yoli recognized. Whitfield closed the door and gestured for her sit. "He has a problem with women in combat roles," Whitfield said without preamble. "Lost his brother in Iraq 15 years ago. Blames a female intelligence officer for bad intel that got his convoy hit. Before we continue, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you know someone who served in special operations and showed courage like this." Yoli processed that information. "Is that what actually happened? Bad intel?" Whitfield's expression flickered. "That is what Hensley believes. The truth is more complicated. But that is not why I brought you here." "Why did you bring me here, sir?" The colonel leaned back in his chair. 3 days ago, we lost contact with a reconnaissance team in the Karengal Valley. 8 hours later, they walked back into base. All 6 of them. They said an angel had been watching over them from the mountains. Said someone had been picking off enemy fighters from positions no human could have reached. Whitfield paused. "When I heard that story, I thought of Phantom Ridge. I thought of you." Yoli's hands went still in her lap. Phantom Ridge was a name she had not spoken aloud in 4 years. A mission that had never happened. A night that still visited her dreams with blood and fire and the sound of her spotter's voice going silent. "That operation is classified," she said. "I know. I was in the room when they classified it." Whitfield leaned forward. "What I need you to understand, Master Sergeant, is that I did not bring you here as a political statement or a quota filler. I brought you here because something is happening in these mountains, something that does not match any pattern we have seen, and I need the best eyes in the military watching these valleys." He met her stare directly. "That means you. Whether Hensley likes it or not, whether anyone likes it or not, you are exactly where you need to be." Yoli felt the weight of his words settle on her shoulders like a familiar rucksack. The weight of expectation. The weight of missions that would never be acknowledged. The weight of being the one person standing between good men and bad deaths. "Understood, sir," she said. "Where do I start?" "Tomorrow. The SEALs are planning a reconnaissance operation into the Karengal. They have requested a sniper element for Overwatch." Whitfield's expression hardened. "Hensley will try to block the assignment. He has friends, influence. And you?" The colonel smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I have something better than friends, Master Sergeant. I have a memory of what you did on Phantom Ridge. And I have a feeling you are about to do it again." Yoli stood. The mountains outside the window were already disappearing into evening shadow, their peaks turning purple and gold in the fading light. Somewhere in those valleys, good men were counting on her. Somewhere in those valleys, enemies waited who did not know she was coming. They never did. The barracks assigned to attached personnel sat at the edge of the FOB, close enough to the perimeter wire that Yoli could hear the wind howling through the mountain passes at night. She dropped her gear on the bunk closest to the door, an old habit from deployments where quick exits meant the difference between living and burning. The room was empty except for one other occupant, a woman with auburn hair pulled back in a tight bun who sat on her bunk, cleaning a spotting scope with a kind of focus that spoke of ritual. Sergeant First Class Delia Marchetti looked up as Yoli entered. Her eyes tracked from boots to rank insignia to the rifle case, and something like recognition flickered across her face. "You are Achebe," she said. "I am your spotter." Yoli set her case down carefully. They assigned you already? Colonel Whitfield assigned me 3 days ago. Told me to study your file. Marchetti's mouth curved into something that was almost a smile. The parts of your file that exist, anyway. There are gaps big enough to drive a tank through. Yoli began unpacking her kit, laying each item out with the precision of someone who had done it 1,000 times. Those gaps are there for a reason. I figured. Marchetti set aside her scope and leaned back against the wall. I also figured that anyone with that many redacted pages probably saved a lot of lives that nobody will ever know about. She shrugged. That is the kind of person I want to be spotting for. For the first time since arriving at FOB Resolute, Yoli felt some of the tension in her shoulders ease. Spotters were more than partners. They were the voice in your ear when the world narrowed to a single point of focus. They were the ones who watched your back while you watched the target a kilometer away. A bad spotter could get you killed. A good one could make you legendary. How long have you been in country? Yoli asked. 14 months, this rotation. 3rd deployment overall. Marchetti's expression shifted, shadows passing behind her eyes. Lost my last shooter in Helmand. IED took the vehicle behind us. She was riding in it because I told her to switch with me. I had a headache. Yoli stopped unpacking. She knew that weight. She carried her own version of it every day. What was her name? Corporal Ana Reyes. 23 years old. She was going to be better than me someday. Marchetti met Yoli's gaze directly. I tell you that because I want you to know I do not take this lightly. When I spot for someone, I'm all the way in. Whatever happens out there, we come back together or we do not come back at all. Yoli extended her hand. Marchetti took it without hesitation. Together, Yoli said. Together. The moment was interrupted by the barracks door slamming open. A specialist with a clipboard stood in the doorway, looking nervous. Master Sergeant Achebi? Chief Warrant Officer Hensley requests your presence at the range. He says there is a qualification issue with your assignment that needs to be resolved. Marchetti's expression darkened. Qualification issue? She has more confirmed kills than half the shooters on this base combined. Yoli held up a hand. It is fine. I expected this. She retrieved her rifle case and followed the specialist into the Afghan morning. The sun had cleared the eastern peaks, flooding the base with light that turned the snow-capped mountains into blazing white monuments. The range was a quarter-mile from the barracks, a stretch of cleared ground with targets set at intervals from 200 to 800 meters. A small crowd had already gathered. Yoli recognized SEAL insignia on several of the observers, along with Army Special Forces and a few faces she could not place. Hensley stood at the firing line with his arms crossed, flanked by 2 other warrant officers. When he saw Yoli approaching, his smile held all the warmth of a snake sizing up a mouse. Master Sergeant Achebi, he called out loudly enough for everyone to hear. Thank you for coming. We have a small problem. Your qualification records from Fort Benning are 3 years old. Regulations require current certification for any shooter attached to a joint task force operation. He spread his hands in a gesture of false helplessness. I am sure you understand. We cannot have unqualified personnel in the field. Yoli set her rifle case down and began assembling her weapon. I understand completely, Chief Warrant Officer. What distances would you like me to qualify at? Hensley's smile widened. Let's make it interesting. 800 meters. 10 shots. Anything less than a perfect score, and I will have to recommend your reassignment to administrative duties. He paused. Unless that sounds too difficult? The crowd shifted. Yoli could feel their eyes on her, could sense the calculations happening behind those faces. Some wanted her to fail. Others were simply curious. A few, she suspected, were hoping to witness something they could tell stories about later. 800 meters was not impossible, but was far enough that wind, humidity, and the slightest tremor could send a round wide. 10 perfect shots in a row required more than skill. It required absolute control. Yoli finished assembling her rifle and moved to the firing position. She settled into a prone stance, pressing her cheek to the stock with the familiarity of an old lover. The scope brought the target into sharp focus, a human silhouette with scoring rings that would reveal every imperfection. She breathed. The first shot cracked across the range. Center mass. Perfect. Hensley's smile flickered. The second shot followed 3 seconds later. Center mass. Perfect. By the fifth shot, the crowd had gone silent. By the eighth, someone whispered something that sounded like impossible. By the 10th, when Yoli rose from her position and began disassembling her rifle without even checking the target, the silence had become something else entirely. A SEAL with Lieutenant Commander insignia stepped forward. He was tall and dark-skinned, with a bearing that commanded attention without demanding it. Drake Okonkwo, Yoli realized. The team leader she had read about in the mission briefings. Someone check that target, Okonkwo said. A specialist jogged downrange. The weight stretched. When he returned, his face held an expression Yoli had seen before. The look of someone whose understanding of what was possible had just been rewritten. 10 shots, he announced. All center mass. The grouping is tighter than my fist. Okonkwo turned to Hensley. I believe that resolves the qualification issue, Chief Warrant Officer. Hensley's jaw tightened. The range scores did not mean anything in actual combat conditions. Anyone can hit paper. Then it is fortunate she will have the opportunity to prove herself in the field. Okonkwo's voice carried an edge that had not been there before. My team requested a sniper element for our Karengal operation. Colonel Whitfield assigned Master Sergeant Achebe. Unless you have evidence of actual incompetence rather than personal objections, I suggest we proceed as planned. The two men stared at each other for a long moment. The crowd watched with the hungry attention of people witnessing a power struggle they would discuss for weeks. Finally, Hensley stepped back. This is not over, Achebe. Paper targets do not shoot back. We will see how you perform when lives are on the line. He walked away without waiting for a response. The crowd began to disperse, conversations erupting in his wake. Okonkwo approached Yoli as she finished packing her rifle. That was impressive shooting, Master Sergeant. Thank you, sir. He studied her for a moment. My family is from Nigeria originally. Lagos, before my parents moved to Detroit. I notice your accent has traces of the same region. Yoli allowed herself a small smile. Ikeja. My grandmother still lives there. Okonkwo nodded slowly. Then we have more in common than just this mission. He extended his hand. Welcome to the task force, Master Sergeant. I look forward to seeing what you can do when the targets shoot back. As Yoli shook his hand, she caught movement at the edge of her vision. Hensley stood near the operations building, watching. Even from this distance, she could read the promise in his posture. He would try again. He would find another angle, another way to undermine her. Men like Hensley did not accept defeat. They simply changed tactics. But Yoli had faced worse than ambitious officers with wounded pride. She had faced enemies in the dark who wanted her dead, who had every advantage except the one that mattered most. She did not miss. And before this mission was over, everyone on this base would understand exactly what that meant. The Joint Operations briefing room smelled like stale coffee and tension. Yoli arrived 10 minutes early and found a seat near the back, watching as operators from different units filtered in and claimed their territory. The SEALs clustered near the front, their easy confidence filling the space around them. Army Special Forces took the left side, quieter but no less dangerous. A handful of Air Force combat controllers occupied a corner, their radios and equipment marking them as the men who would call on fire from the sky if everything went wrong. Marchetti slid into the seat beside Yoli. Word travels fast on this base, she murmured. Half the operators are talking about your qualification shoot. The other half think it is exaggerated. Let them think what they want. Lieutenant Commander Okonkwo entered with his team and took position at the front. Behind him came Senior Chief Petty Officer Mateo Vega, a stocky man with forearms like tree trunks and eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. The senior enlisted SEAL carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had earned respect in places where rank meant nothing and competence meant everything. Colonel Whitfield entered last, followed by Hensley. The Chief Warrant Officer took a position against the wall where he could observe the entire room. His gaze found Yoli immediately and stayed there. Whitfield activated the display screen. A satellite image of the Karengal Valley appeared, all sharp ridgelines and deep shadows. 48 hours from now, he began, Lieutenant Commander Okonkwo's team will conduct a reconnaissance operation into Grid Square Delta 7. Intelligence suggests a high-value target is using a village in this valley as a waypoint for moving fighters and weapons across the border. Our mission is to confirm his presence and gather actionable intelligence for a follow-on strike. He clicked to the next image. The terrain expanded, showing the approach routes and potential observation points. The challenge is the geography. The valley is a natural kill zone. High ground on 3 sides, limited egress options, and local fighters who know every goat path and hiding spot. Previous operations in this area have taken casualties. We are not going to add to that number. Okonkwo stepped forward. My team will insert by helicopter at landing zone Alpha, here. He pointed to a clearing on the eastern ridge. We move on foot to observation point Bravo, establish eyes on the village, and extract within 36 hours. Standard reconnaissance profile. A Special Forces captain raised his hand. What about Overwatch? Okonkwo glanced at Yoli. Master Sergeant Achebe and Sergeant First Class Marchetti will provide sniper overwatch from an elevated position on the northern ridge. They will insert separately and establish a hide site with line of sight to both our approach route and the village itself. Hensley pushed off from the wall. Sir, if I may. Whitfield's expression remained neutral. Go ahead, Chief Warrant Officer. I have concerns about the overwatch element. The northern ridge position requires a technical climb and extended solo movement through unsecured terrain. With respect, Master Sergeant Achebe has no documented mountain warfare experience in her available service record. Sending an unproven asset into that environment creates risk for the entire operation. The room shifted. Yoli felt the attention swing toward her like a spotlight. Okonkwo's jaw tightened. Master Sergeant Achebe's qualification scores speak for themselves, and Colonel Whitfield personally assigned her to this task force. Scores on a range, Hensley countered. Not in the field. Not in these mountains. He turned to address the room. I am not questioning her shooting ability. I am questioning whether she has the operational experience to function independently in one of the most dangerous valleys in Afghanistan. Silence stretched. Yoli could feel Marchetti tensing beside her, ready to defend. But this was not Marchetti's fight. Yoli stood. The movement drew every eye in the room. Chief Warrant Officer Hensley raises a valid concern, she said, keeping her voice even. My documented experience does have gaps. What is not documented is classified above the clearance level of everyone in this room, except Colonel Whitfield. She let that settle before continuing. I cannot tell you where I have operated or what I have done. I can tell you that I have functioned independently in terrain worse than the Karengal, against enemies more dangerous than local fighters, in conditions that would make this operation look like a training exercise. She met Hensley's stare directly. If Chief Warrant Officer Hensley would like to continue questioning my qualifications, I suggest he take it up with the Colonel, where he can trust that when the shooting starts, I will be exactly where I need to be, doing exactly what needs to be done. The room was absolutely still. Colonel Whitfield cleared his throat. I believe that settles the matter. Master Sergeant Achebe and Sergeant Marchetti will provide overwatch as planned. He looked at Hensley with an expression that brooked no further argument. Any other concerns should be directed to my office. Privately. Hensley's face darkened, but he said nothing. The briefing continued with operational details. Insertion times, communication protocols, contingency plans. Yoli absorbed it all while tracking the undercurrents in the room. Some of the SEALs were looking at her differently now, curiosity replacing skepticism. Others remained unconvinced. One in particular, a petty officer first class with a sniper rifle case beside his chair, watched her with the evaluating gaze of a competitor. After the briefing broke, he approached. Tomas Reinhold, he said. Team Sniper. Yoli recognized the name from the personnel files. 12 confirmed kills. Multiple combat deployments. Respected throughout the SEAL community. Master Sergeant Achebe, she replied. Reinhold studied her for a moment. That was a nice speech. Classified experience, dangerous terrain, enemies worse than what we face here. He tilted his head. But speeches do not mean anything when the bullets start flying. No, Yoli agreed. They do not. I have been the Overwatch element on 6 operations in this valley. I know every ridge, every approach, every place where the enemy likes to set up ambushes. He paused. I also know that the northern position you're taking is a death trap if anything goes wrong. No extraction route, no support, no backup. If the enemy finds you up there, you're on your own. I'm always on my own. Something flickered in Reinhold's expression. Respect, perhaps, or the beginning of it. We will see, he said. After this operation, if you're still standing, maybe I will believe the hype. He turned to leave, then paused. For what it is worth, I hope you are as good as Whitfield thinks you are, because my teammates are going to be counting on you to keep them alive. He walked away before Yoli could respond. Marchetti appeared at her shoulder. Making friends? Something like that. They gathered their gear and headed for the door. Outside, the Afghan sun was beginning its descent toward the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Somewhere in those mountains, an enemy was waiting. Somewhere in those valleys, good men would soon be walking into danger. And somewhere on a ridge that most people could not even reach, Yoli would be watching over them all. But as she walked toward the barracks, she noticed Hensley standing near the communications building, speaking urgently into his satellite phone. His eyes met hers across the distance, and the hatred in them was pure and undisguised. He was not finished. Whatever he was planning, whatever moves he was making behind the scenes, this was far from over. Yoli kept walking. She had faced enemies who wanted her dead in a dozen countries across 3 continents. She had survived things that would break most people. One bitter officer with a grudge was not going to stop her, but she would be watching him too, because in her experience, the enemies you could see were never as dangerous as the ones operating in the shadows. And Hensley was definitely operating in the shadows. The night before deployment, Yoli found herself unable to sleep. She lay on her bunk staring at the plywood ceiling, listening to the wind shake the walls and thinking about all the ways the mission could go wrong. The northern ridge. No extraction. No backup. Reinhold's words kept circling back like vultures waiting for something to die. At 0300, she gave up on rest and made her way to the small gym attached to the operations building. The equipment was old and the lighting was harsh, but it was empty at this hour, and empty was what she needed. She was 30 minutes into a punishing routine when the door opened. Lieutenant Commander Okonkwo entered wearing PT gear, his expression suggesting he had the same relationship with sleep that she did. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. Yoli gestured to the open space. Plenty of room. They worked out in silence for a while, the only sounds their breathing and the clank of weights. It was Okonkwo who finally spoke. "My grandmother used to tell me stories about warriors," he said between sets. Yoruba legends about hunters who could move through the forest without making a sound, who could see in the darkness, who protected their villages from things that ordinary people could not fight. He set down his weights and looked at her. "When I read your file, the parts that exist, I thought about those stories." Yoli paused her own routine. "What made you think of them?" "Because the file does not make sense. You have commendations that reference operations with no details. Awards that cite classified actions. 15 years of service with enough redacted pages to fill a novel." He shook his head slowly. "Either you're the most over-decorated paper pusher in military history, or you're something else entirely." Yoli considered her response carefully. "What do you think I am?" "I think you are one of the warriors my grandmother told me about. The kind they do not put in the official histories because what they do is too important to acknowledge." He met her eyes. "I think Colonel Whitfield brought you here because something bad is coming, and he wants someone who can handle it when it arrives." The gym felt smaller suddenly, the air heavier with unspoken truth. Okonkwo continued, "I have been running operations in Afghanistan for 3 years. I have lost men, good men, brothers. Every time I take a team into those mountains, I wonder if this is the mission where my luck runs out." He paused. "Tomorrow, my team is walking into the Karengal Valley, and our lives will depend on someone I have known for less than 48 hours. So I need to ask you directly, Master Sergeant, when everything goes wrong, And it always goes wrong. Will you be there? Yoli thought about Phantom Ridge. She thought about the teammate she had lost, the shots she had taken, the choices that still haunted her. She thought about the weight of being the last line of defense for people who would never know her name. I will be there, she said, no matter what it costs. Something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps. The understanding shared by people who had both walked through fire and emerged carrying scars that did not show on the surface. Okonkwo nodded. Then I will trust you with my team. He extended his hand. Do not make me regret it. Yoli shook it. I will not. She returned to her barracks as dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. Marchetti was awake, checking their equipment with methodical precision. Could not sleep either, Yoli asked. Never came before an operation. Marchetti held up a rifle scope, examining it for dust. But I did hear something interesting while you were gone. Yoli began her own equipment check. What did you hear? Hensley filed a formal complaint with SOCOM headquarters. Marchetti's voice was carefully neutral. He is claiming that Colonel Whitfield has compromised operational security by assigning unvetted personnel to sensitive missions. He wants an investigation. Yoli's hands stilled on her rifle. When did this happen? Last night. The communications sergeant owes me a favor. Marchetti looked up. It gets worse. The complaint specifically names you as a potential security risk. He is suggesting your classified background might not be what Whitfield claims it is. He is implying you might be compromised. The accusation hit like a physical blow. After everything she had sacrificed, everything she had done in the shadows to protect people who would never thank her, to be called compromised was an insult beyond measure. What happens now? Yoli asked, keeping her voice steady. Nothing immediate. SOCOM will review the complaint after the operation. But if Hensley has allies at headquarters, if he can make enough noise, they might pull you from the task force entirely. Marchetti's expression hardened. He is trying to destroy your career, Yoli. Not just block this mission. Destroy everything. Yoli resumed her equipment check with mechanical precision. Her mind raced through possibilities, through responses, through the chess moves required to counter an enemy who wore the same uniform. Does Whitfield know? Marchetti nodded. He is fighting it, but there is only so much he can do. Hensley has been building relationships at SOCOM for years. Whitfield has enemies too, people who think he has too much autonomy, too much power. This complaint gives them ammunition. So I have one mission to prove myself before they take everything away. Marchetti was quiet for a moment. You have one mission to prove that Hensley is wrong about you. To prove that women can operate at this level. To prove that whatever is in your classified file is worth protecting. She reached out and gripped Yoli's shoulder. No pressure. Despite everything, Yoli laughed. It was a short, bitter sound, but it was real. No pressure at all. They finished their preparations as the base came alive around them. Helicopters began their pre-flight checks. Operators moved toward their assigned staging areas. The machinery of war was spinning up, indifferent to the personal battles being fought within its gears. Yoli shouldered her pack and her rifle and stepped outside. The mountains loomed in the distance, ancient and patient and deadly. Somewhere in those valleys, enemies waited who wanted to kill Americans. Somewhere on this base, an enemy in American uniform wanted to destroy her. She would face them both. Senior Chief Vega approached as she headed toward the helicopter pad. The SEAL's weathered face was unreadable. Master Sergeant, he said. A word. Yoli stopped. Senior Chief. Vega glanced around, confirming they were not overheard. I have been doing this for 22 years. I have seen officers play politics while good people died. I have seen careers destroyed by men who cared more about their egos than their mission. He fixed her with a stare that had probably broken countless recruits. I do not know what your story is. I do not know what Whitfield sees in you. But I know that my boys are going into that valley today, and you are the one watching over them. I understand, Senior Chief. Do you? Because if anything happens to my team because you are not focused, because you were thinking about Hensley or your career or anything except keeping them alive, I will personally ensure that you never work in special operations again. He paused. But if you do your job, if you bring my boys home, then you will have 16 SEALs who will swear on their lives that you belong here. and that is worth more than any classified file. Yoli met his stare without flinching. Your boys are coming home, Senior Chief. All of them. Vegas studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded once, turned, and walked away. The helicopter blades began to spin. The mission was starting, and everything Yoli had worked for, everything she had sacrificed, everything she was, would be decided in the next 36 hours. The helicopter banked hard over the ridgeline, and Yoli felt her stomach drop as the ground fell away into shadow. Below them, the Korangal Valley stretched like a wound in the earth, dark and deep and hungry for blood. She had studied the maps until she could see the terrain with her eyes closed, but maps did not capture the malevolence of this place. The valley had a reputation. Americans had died here in numbers that the Pentagon preferred not to discuss publicly. The locals called it the Valley of Death, and they were not being poetic. Marchetti sat beside her, face illuminated by the dim red lights of the helicopter interior. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing to say that had not already been said. The pilot's voice crackled through their headsets. 2 minutes to insertion. Northern Ridge, LZ, is clear. Weather is holding, but we have reports of movement in the valley. Stay sharp. Yoli checked her rifle one final time. The M110 was an extension of her body now, as familiar as her own heartbeat. She had carried variations of this weapon through places that did not exist, had used it to end lives that threatened innocent people, had felt its weight in her hands during the worst moments of her career. Phantom Ridge. The memory surfaced unbidden. A night 4 years ago. A different mountain range in a country she could not name. A mission to eliminate a target who was planning something catastrophic. Her spotter, Sergeant First Class Damon Reese, had been beside her in the hide site, calling wind adjustments as she tracked the target through her scope. Then everything had gone wrong. The helicopter lurched, snapping her back to the present. Marchetti's hand found her arm in the darkness. You okay? Yoli forced the memory down. Fine. Just focused. The helicopter flared and touched down on a rocky outcropping barely large enough to accommodate it. Yoli and Marchetti were out before the skids fully settled, moving low and fast toward the treeline. Behind them, the aircraft lifted off and disappeared into the night, the sound of its rotors fading until only the wind remained. They were alone. The northern ridge rose above them like a wall of stone and ice. The route to their designated position required a technical climb that would have challenged experienced mountaineers. They would be doing it in the dark, carrying 60 pounds of equipment, in temperatures that turned exposed skin numb within minutes. Marchetti studied the cliff face with her night vision. This is going to be fun. Your definition of fun concerns me. They began the ascent, hand over hand, finding holds in rock that crumbled without warning, pulling themselves up through sections where a single mistake meant a fall that would not end well. Yoli's muscles burned. Her lungs ached from the thin mountain air. Sweat froze on her skin despite the exertion. 3 hours later, they reached the position. A natural depression in the rock created a hide site with clear sight lines to the valley floor below. Yoli began setting up while Marchetti established their communication equipment. Overwatch 1 to Viper Actual, Marchetti transmitted. We are in position. Sending confirmation now. The radio crackled. Viper Actual copies. Insertion successful. Beginning movement to observation point Bravo. Keep the lights on for us. Copy that. Overwatch 1 out. Yoli settled behind her rifle and began scanning the valley. The SEAL team would be moving through the lower terrain now, 16 shadows in a landscape full of dangers. Her job was to see what they could not, to identify threats before they materialized, to be their guardian angel on the mountain. The hours passed slowly. Yoli maintained her vigil, while Marchetti took shifts monitoring communications and watching their flanks. The valley below remained quiet, but it was the quiet of a predator waiting to strike. As dawn approached, Marchetti spoke softly. Can I ask you something? Yoli did not take her eye from the scope. Go ahead. Back at the base, when you could not sleep, you said something. A name. I heard it through the wall. She paused. Reese. Who was Reese? The question hit harder than Yoli expected. She had not realized she talked in her sleep. had not realized that Phantom Ridge followed her even into unconsciousness. Sergeant First Class Damon Reese, she said, finally. My spotter. For years ago. What happened to him? Yoli was quiet for a long moment. The scope showed her the valley, but her mind showed her a different mountain, a different night. We were on an operation. Classified. The target was high value, the kind that changes history if they succeed. We had good intelligence, good positioning, everything by the book. She swallowed. The intelligence was wrong. Not bad intel, not mistakes. Wrong deliberately. Someone had fed us false information to draw us out. The target was bait. Marchetti said nothing, waiting. They hit us from 3 sides. Reese took the first round, went through his shoulder, shattered his collarbone. He told me to take the shot anyway, to complete the mission while he held them off. She closed her eyes briefly. I had a choice. Complete the mission or save my spotter. I cannot do both. Which did you choose? The mission. Yoli's voice was barely audible. I took the shot. Eliminated the target. By the time I got back to Reese, he had bled out. Died alone while I was looking through a scope. The wind howled across the ridge, filling the silence between them. The target I killed was planning a biological attack on 3 American cities. If he had succeeded, thousands would have died. Maybe tens of thousands. The intelligence community gave me a commendation that does not exist for an operation that never happened. Yoli finally looked at Marchetti, and I have spent every day since then wondering if I made the right choice. Marchetti's expression held no judgment, only understanding. You saved thousands of lives. I let my partner die. You completed the mission he told you to complete. You honored his sacrifice by making it mean something. Yoli turned back to her scope. The valley was lightening now, shadows retreating as the sun climbed. Somewhere below, the SEAL team was approaching their observation point, trusting her to keep them safe. I swore after Phantom Ridge that I would never lose another partner. Never leave anyone behind again. She adjusted her position slightly. That is why I am here. That is why it does not matter what Hensley does or what Sockham decides. Those men down there are coming home. All of them. Even if it kills me. Marchetti was quiet for a moment. Then she reached out and squeezed Yoli's shoulder. It will not kill you, she said, because I'm going to be right here making sure it does not. Partners do not leave partners. Not ever. The radio crackled. Viper Actual to Overwatch 1. We have reached Observation Point Bravo. Eyes on the village. Confirming presence of military-age males and possible weapons caches. Stand by for further assessment. Yoli keyed her response. Overwatch 1 copies. We have you in sight. Maintaining coverage. She settled back into her position. I pressed the scope, watching over the men who were counting on her. Somewhere in the valley below, the enemy was watching too. And soon, very soon, the watching would be over. The first sign of trouble came at 1400 hours. Yoli was scanning the eastern ridge when she caught movement that did not belong. A shape that was too deliberate, too controlled to be wildlife. Contact, she murmured. Eastern ridge, bearing 095, approximately 800 meters from the village. Marchetti swung her spotting scope. I see them. 3 figures. No, 4. They are moving parallel to the valley floor, staying below the ridgeline. Yoli tracked them through her scope. The figures moved with military precision, spacing themselves to avoid presenting a clustered target. These were not farmers or goat herders. These were fighters who had done this before. Overwatch 1 to Viper Actual, she transmitted. Be advised, we have eyes on 4 military-age males moving along the eastern ridge. They appear to be establishing an observation position overlooking your location. The response came immediately. Viper Actual copies. Can you confirm weapons? Yoli watched as one of the figures paused and unslung something from his back. The shape was unmistakable. Confirmed. At least 1 RPG. Probable small arms on the others. They are setting up a firing position. There was a pause on the radio. Then Okonkwo's voice returned, tighter now. Understood. We are pulling back to secondary position. Maintain observation and advise if situation changes. Copy that. But even as she acknowledged the transmission, Yoli felt the wrongness of the situation spreading through her gut. for fighters on the eastern ridge was not an ambush. It was not enough. If the enemy knew the SEALs were here, they would not send 4 men with 1 RPG. Unless the 4 men were not the ambush. Unless they were the distraction. Marchetti, she said quietly, start scanning the western approach and the northern pass behind us. Marchetti shifted her scope. For a long moment, there was only the sound of wind across stone. Then her spotter went very still. "Oh no, what do you see?" Marchetti's voice was barely a whisper. "The western ridge. I count at least 20 fighters moving into position. They have a clear line of fire to the SEALs' extraction route, and there are more coming through the northern pass. They are boxing them in." Yoli's blood turned to ice. This was not a chance encounter. This was a coordinated ambush using multiple elements to create a kill zone. Someone had known exactly where the SEALs would be and exactly when they would be there. Overwatch 1 to Viper Actual, she transmitted, fighting to keep her voice steady. Priority message. You have approximately 20-plus fighters establishing positions on the western ridge. Additional forces moving through the northern pass. You're being surrounded. Recommend immediate extraction. The radio crackled with static. When Okonkwo's voice came through, it carried the controlled calm of a man who understood exactly how bad his situation had become. Viper Actual copies. Extraction is negative. LZ is compromised. He paused. We're going to have to fight our way out. What is your assessment of the enemy positions? Yoli ran the calculations in her head. The geometry was brutal. The SEALs were in a depression that provided cover from direct fire, but also limited their mobility. The enemy had the high ground on 3 sides. The only open route was the cliff face behind them, which was not a route at all. You have approximately 45 minutes before they complete the encirclement, she said. The eastern element is the smallest. If you can break through there before the western force repositions, you might be able to reach the secondary extraction point. Understood. Viper Actual is moving. He paused. Overwatch 1, I need you to buy us time. Can you slow down that western element? Yoli looked at the western ridge through her scope. 20 fighters at minimum, spread across a wide front, moving through terrain that offered plenty of cover. One sniper could harass them, could make them cautious, could slow their advance. But she could not stop them. And while she was focused on the western ridge, she could not watch the SEALs' backs. I can slow them, she said, but I will not be able to provide direct overwatch for your movement. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Okonkwo was asking her to choose between protecting his team during their escape or delaying the force that would cut off that escape entirely. Do it, Okonkwo said finally. Buy us whatever time you can. We will handle our own security. Yoli shifted her position, bringing the western ridge into focus. The fighters were spread across nearly 300 meters of terrain, using rocks and scrub brush for concealment as they advanced. She would have to be surgical. Every shot had to count. Marchetti, she said, call my wind. Wind is left to right, for miles per hour. Range to lead element, 620 meters. Yoli found her first target, a fighter who had moved slightly ahead of the others, eager to reach his position. She could see the rifle in his hands, the ammunition pouches on his chest, the expression of anticipation on his face. She breathed out slowly and squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked across the valley. The fighter dropped without a sound. The effect was immediate. The advancing line froze, then scattered for cover. Voices shouted in Pashto, trying to locate the source of the shot. Yoli was already moving to her second target, another fighter who had made the mistake of looking up toward a ridge. Second target, Marchetti called. Range 640. Wind steady. Yoli fired. Another fighter fell. Now the enemy knew where she was. She could see muzzle flashes as they began returning fire, but they were shooting blind, their rounds cracking against rock faces dozens of meters from her position. At this range, with this terrain, they could not touch her. But they could call for reinforcements. They could redirect forces. They could make her position untenable. She fired again and again. Each shot was a message. Each fallen fighter was a delay, a moment of confusion, a reason for the others to stay behind cover instead of advancing. Overwatch 1 to Viper Actual, She transmitted between shots. Western element is suppressed. They're not moving, but they will figure out my position soon. I estimate 10 minutes before they either flank me or bring up heavier weapons. Okonkwo's response was punctuated by the sound of gunfire in the background. Copy. We have engaged the eastern element. Making progress, but taking fire. Keep them pinned as long as you can. Yoli returned to her scope. The western fighters were beginning to adapt, moving in short rushes between cover, trying to close the distance. She dropped another one, then another, but for every fighter she hit, 2 more seemed to take his place. Marchetti's voice cut through her focus. Yoli, the northern pass. More fighters just came through. A lot more. I count at least 30. They are heading straight for the SEAL's position. Yoli felt the situation shifting from bad to catastrophic. 40 fighters on the west, 30 from the north. Unknown numbers on the east. The SEALs were not being ambushed. They were being annihilated. And there was nothing she could do to stop it. Not from here. The thought crystallized in her mind with terrible clarity. Her current position gave her range, but not the angle she needed. If she wanted to make a real difference, if she wanted to give those men a chance to survive, she would have to move. She would have to go higher. She would have to take the peak. Marchetti, she said, I need you to maintain position here and keep suppressing the western element. What are you going to do? Yoli looked up at the mountain, rising behind them. The peak was another 300 meters of vertical climb, exposed and treacherous. But from up there, she would have line of sight to every enemy position in the valley. I'm going to the top, she said, and I'm going to kill every single one of them. Marchetti grabbed her arm before she could move. That climb is suicide. The rock is unstable. You will be completely exposed. And if they spot you halfway up, you are dead. If I stay here, those SEALs are dead. Yoli pulled free and began gathering her essential equipment. Rifle, ammunition, water, radio. Everything else would stay behind. I can make the climb in 20 minutes. From the peak, I can cover every approach to their position. And what happens when the enemy redirects fire to you? What happens when they send fighters up the backside of that mountain? Then I will deal with it. Yoli met her spotter's eyes. Delia, I cannot watch 16 men die because I was too afraid to take a risk. I cannot have another Phantom Ridge. I will not. The use of her first name stopped Marchetti cold. In 2 days of partnership, Yoli had never used it. Marchetti's jaw tightened. Then I'm coming with you. No. Yoli's voice left no room for argument. I need you here, maintaining suppression on the western element. If they advance while I'm climbing, the SEALs lose their window. You are the only thing keeping that force pinned. I am your spotter. My job is to be beside you. Your job is to help me keep those men alive. Right now, that means staying here and doing what only you can do. Yoli softened her voice. I will be on the radio the entire time. You can call my wind from here. The peak is only 300 meters higher. We will still be a team. Marchetti stared at her for a long moment. The sounds of distant gunfire echoed through the valley, a constant reminder of how little time they had. If you die up there, she said finally, I will never forgive you. Then I will not die. Yoli turned and began the climb. The first 50 meters were manageable. Handholds were solid. The rock face angled enough to provide footing. She moved quickly, trusting muscle memory and years of training to guide her movements. The rifle on her back shifted with each reach, its weight both burden and comfort. At 100 meters, the terrain changed. The rock became loose and treacherous, crumbling beneath her fingers without warning. She slipped once, catching herself on a narrow ledge that groaned under her weight. For 3 heartbeats, she hung suspended over a drop that would end everything. Then the ledge held. She kept climbing. The radio crackled in her ear. Overwatch 1, this is Viper Actual. We are pinned down. Easter Element has reinforced. We have 2 wounded, 1 critical. Requesting immediate support. Okonkwo's voice was steady, but Yoli could hear the strain beneath it. The controlled calm of a leader watching his options disappear. Viper Actual, she responded, breathing hard from the climb. I am repositioning to elevated overwatch. Estimate 8 minutes to new position. Can you hold? The pause before his answer told her everything. We will hold. Do what you have to do. She climbed faster. At 200 meters, the wind hit her like a fist. The peak was exposed to currents that tore through the mountain passes, gusts that threatened to rip her from the rock face with every movement. Her fingers went numb despite the gloves. Her muscles screamed for rest. She could not give them. Below, she could hear the intensifying rhythm of combat. The sharp crack of rifles, the deeper thump of explosions, the shouts of men fighting for their lives. The SEALs were holding, but they were being pushed back toward the cliff face that offered no escape. At 250 meters, a bullet cracked against the rock 3 feet from her head. They had spotted her. Yoli pressed herself flat against the mountain as more rounds snapped past, close enough to feel the displaced air. The fighters on the western ridge had seen her climbing and were trying to bring her down before she could reach the peak. Overwatch 2 to Overwatch 1. Marchetti's voice came through urgent and focused. I see the shooters targeting you. I am engaging. Yoli heard the distant crack of Marchetti's rifle, then another. The incoming fire slackened as the enemy was forced to deal with a new threat. Keep moving, Marchetti commanded. I have him occupied. Go. Yoli moved, hand over hand, ignoring the burn in her arms, ignoring the wind that tried to tear her loose, ignoring everything except the next hold and the next meter of vertical progress. 50 meters to the peak. The gunfire below reached a crescendo. She heard Okonkwo calling for ammunition redistribution, heard Senior Chief Vega shouting orders to shift positions, heard the distinctive sound of a grenade detonating too close to friendly forces. 40 meters. Another burst of fire came her way, but it was wild, unaimed. Marchetti was doing her job, keeping the enemy's attention divided. 30 meters. Her hand found a hole that was not there. She slipped, her body swinging out over empty air, one hand all that kept her from a fall that would paint the rocks below. For an eternal second, she hung, her grip failing, her strength nearly gone. Reese's face flashed through her mind. The teammate she had left behind. The promise she had made to never let it happen again. She found another hold. She pulled herself up. She kept climbing. 20 meters. The peak was visible now, a jagged crown of rock that looked like broken teeth against the gray sky. She could see the position she needed, a natural depression that would give her cover and sight lines to the entire valley. 10 meters. Her lungs burned. Her arms shook. Every part of her body begged her to stop, to rest, to accept that she had done everything she could. She did not stop. 5 meters. The final stretch was almost vertical, a wall of stone that required every ounce of strength and skill she possessed. She jammed her fingers into cracks, pressed her boots against surfaces that offered barely any friction, and pulled herself up through sheer force of will. And then she was there, the peak. Yoli rolled into the depression and lay on her back, gasping for air that seemed too thin to sustain life. Her hands were bleeding through her gloves. Her shoulders felt like they had been torn from their sockets. She had never been more exhausted in her life. But she had made it. She forced herself to move, to set up her rifle, to find a stable position. The scope came to her eye, and suddenly the entire valley was laid out before her like a map. She could see everything. The SEALs were clustered near the cliff face, using every scrap of cover available. 2 men were down, being tended by their teammates. The others were returning fire in controlled bursts, but they were surrounded on 3 sides with nowhere to go. The enemy was closing in. Fighters advanced from the west in short rushes. The northern element had nearly reached flanking position. The eastern force was pushing hard, sensing that victory was within reach. 70-plus fighters against 16 SEALs. Impossible. But they did not know she was here. They did not know that death had just taken position on the mountain above them. Yoli settled her breathing. She found her first target, a fighter directing others from behind a boulder, clearly some kind of leader. Overwatch 1 to Viper Actual, she transmitted. I am in position. Engaging now. She squeezed the trigger. The leader dropped, and then Yoli went to work. The second shot took down a machine gunner who had been pouring fire into the SEAL's position. The third eliminated a fighter carrying an RPG who was maneuvering for a clear shot at the clustered Americans. The fourth and fifth dropped 2 men who made the mistake of running across open ground. 5 shots, 5 kills, 8 seconds. The enemy's advance stuttered. Fighters who had been moving with confidence suddenly found themselves diving for cover, unsure where death was coming from. The mountain had seemed safe, had seemed like their ally. Now it was killing them. Marchetti's voice came through the radio, professional and focused despite the chaos. Wind shifting, coming from a northeast now. 6 miles per hour. At just 0.5 mil left. Yoli made the correction and found her next target. A fighter was rallying others behind a rock formation, gesturing toward the SEAL's position, trying to restart the assault. She put a round through his chest and watched the men around him scatter. Overwatch 1 to Viper Actual, she transmitted. I am thinning them out. Western Element is combat ineffective. Northern Element is stalled. Recommend you push through the eastern approach now while they are disorganized. Okonkwo's response came between bursts of gunfire. Copy that. Moving now. Keep them off her backs. Yoli shifted her focus to the eastern ridge. The fighters there had been the most aggressive, pressing hard against the SEAL's position. But they were also the most exposed to her new angle. From the peak, she could see behind the rocks they were using for cover, could identify their positions with perfect clarity. She began systematic elimination. One fighter rose to throw a grenade. She dropped him before his arm completed the motion. Another tried to reposition to a better firing angle. He made it 3 steps before her round found him. A third was on a radio, probably calling for reinforcements. The radio shattered along with the hand holding it. Below, the SEALs began their push. She could see Okonkwo at the front, moving with the fluid aggression of a man who had done this 100 times. Senior Chief Vega coordinated the rear element, ensuring the wounded were protected during the movement. Reinhold was on the flank, his own rifle barking as he engaged targets she could not reach. For 3 minutes, the tide of battle reversed completely. The hunters became the hunted. Fighters who had expected easy prey found themselves dying without ever seeing their killer. The mountain that had been their ambush position had become their graveyard. Then the enemy adapted. Yoli saw it happening in real time. A commander somewhere in the chaos recognized the pattern, understood that the devastating fire was coming from a single elevated position. Orders were shouted in Pashto. Fighters began directing their weapons upward, toward the peak. The first volley missed by meters, the shooters unable to gauge her exact position. The second was closer. The third sent rock fragments spraying across her face as rounds impacted the stone around her. Overwatch 2 to Overwatch 1, Marchetti called urgently. They are concentrating fire on your position. At least 15 shooters targeting the peak. You need to displace. Negative. Yoli adjusted her position slightly, making herself smaller behind the natural cover. If I move, I lose the angle. The SEALs are not clear yet. She found one of the shooters targeting her and put him down. Then another. But for every one she eliminated, more joined the effort. Rounds cracked past her head with increasing frequency. A bullet tugged at the fabric of her sleeve, missing flesh by millimeters. The mathematics were brutal. She was one shooter against dozens, and they had identified her position. She could kill them faster than any sniper in history, but eventually, one of their rounds would find her. She kept shooting anyway. 11 kills. 15. 18. A round struck the rock inches from her scope, showering her eyes with debris. She blinked away blood and grit and found her next target. 20 kills. Viper Actual to Overwatch 1. Okonkwo's voice cut through the chaos. We are almost clear. 30 seconds. Yoli scanned the terrain between the SEALs and safety. A group of fighters had anticipated their route and was moving to cut them off. If they reached the choke point before the SEALs, the entire team would be caught in a crossfire. She shifted her aim and began dropping them one by one. The range was over 700 meters, the wind was gusting unpredictably, and rounds were impacting all around her. She ignored everything except the scope and the trigger. First fighter down. Second. Third. The enemy group faltered, confused by losses they could not explain. The SEALs pushed through the gap before it could close. Viper Actual to Overwatch 1. We are clear. Say again, we are clear. Beginning movement to extraction point. Yoli allowed herself a single breath of relief. Then a round struck the rock directly beside her head, and the world went white. The impact threw her backward, her rifle tumbling from her hands. She lay stunned, ears ringing, vision swimming. Blood ran from somewhere on her scalp, warm and wet against her frozen skin. Overwatch 1. This is Overwatch 2. Marchetti's voice was frantic. Yoli, respond. Yoli. She tried to speak, but her mouth would not cooperate. The sky above her was gray and spinning. She could hear gunfire continuing somewhere below, could hear shouts in languages she did not understand, could hear the wind howling across the peak like a morning cry. Move, she told herself. You have to move. Her body refused to obey. The enemy would be coming now. They knew where she was, knew she was wounded or dead. They would send fighters up the mountain to confirm the kill, to take her weapon as a trophy, to do whatever victorious enemies did to fallen soldiers. She thought of Reese. She thought of Marchetti waiting below. She thought of the SEALs who had made it to safety because she had held her position. It was worth it, she realized. Whatever happened next, it was worth it. But she was not ready to die. Not here. Not yet. Yoli rolled onto her stomach, fighting through the dizziness and pain. Her rifle lay 2 meters away, tantalizingly close. She began to crawl. Every movement sent agony through her skull. Blood dripped into her eyes, blurring her vision. Her arms felt like they belonged to someone else, weak and uncoordinated. 1 meter. The sounds of combat were fading below. The SEALs were moving away, heading for extraction. She had bought them their lives. Now she had to fight for her own. 1.5 meters. Her fingers touched the rifle stock. She pulled it toward her, cradling it against her chest like a lifeline. Overwatch 1 to Overwatch 2, she managed, her voice barely a whisper. I am alive. Wounded, but alive. Beginning displacement. The relief in Marchetti's response was palpable. Copy that. I'm moving to link up with you. Stay on the radio. Yoli pulled herself into a sitting position, fighting the urge to vomit. The world was still spinning, but it was slowing down. The ringing in her ears was fading to a manageable roar. She checked her rifle. Still functional. She checked her ammunition. For magazines remaining. Below, fighters were beginning to climb the mountain. She could see them picking their way up the lower slopes, motivated by vengeance and the desire to kill the sniper who had devastated their forces. Yoli found a stable position, pressed her eye to the scope, and waited. They wanted to reach the peak. She would make them pay for every meter. The first climber appeared over a rocky outcropping 150 meters below. Yoli watched him through her scope, tracking his movement as he searched for handholds in the fading afternoon light. He was young, probably no older than 20, with a rifle slung across his back and murder in his eyes. She let him climb another 10 meters before she fired. The round took him center mass. He fell without a sound, his body tumbling down the mountain until it disappeared from view. The others hesitated. She could see them clustered on a ledge below, conferring in rapid Pashto, pointing up toward the peak with expressions that mixed rage with fear. They knew she was wounded. They knew she was alone. But they also knew she was still killing them. One of them shouted something that sounded like a command. 3 fighters began climbing simultaneously, spreading out to make themselves harder targets. It was smart tactics. She could not shoot all 3 at once. Yoli picked the one on the left, the one making the fastest progress. Her shot sent him spinning off the rock face. She shifted to the center climber, but he had already ducked behind a boulder, using the terrain for cover. The third was doing the same, advancing in short bursts between protected positions. They were learning, adapting, using her own tactics against her. Overwatch 2 to Overwatch 1. Marchetti was breathing hard, clearly moving fast. I am climbing toward your position. ETA, 15 minutes. Negative, Yoli responded. Do not come up here. The approach is compromised. They will see you. I am not leaving you up there alone. You're not going to die trying to reach me either. Yoli fired again, forcing one of the climbers back into cover. Get to the extraction point. Link up with the SEALs. That is an order. Marchetti's response was immediate and fierce. You do not get to give me orders, Yoli. Not anymore. Not after everything. I told you we come back together, or we do not come back at all. Amend it. Before Yoli could argue, movement on her right drew her attention. A fighter had found a route she had not anticipated, a narrow chimney in the rock that provided cover almost all the way to the peak. He was already within 50 meters, close enough that she could see the sweat on his face, the determination in his eyes. She swung her rifle toward him, but the motion sent a wave of dizziness crashing through her skull. Her vision blurred. Her hand shook. The crosshairs wavered across the target, unable to steady. The fighter saw her struggling. He saw his opportunity. He raised his rifle. Yoli fired through the blur, through the shaking, through the pain. The round went wide, sparking off stone inches from his head. He flinched but did not fall. His own weapon came up, the barrel pointing directly at her. A shot rang out from below. The fighter jerked, his rifle discharging harmlessly into the air as Marchetti's round punched through his shoulder. He lost his grip and fell, screaming, until the mountains silenced him. Yoli looked down and saw her spotter climbing with reckless speed, rifle strapped to her back, covering ground that should have taken 20 minutes in less than 10. I told you not to come, Yoli said over the radio. And I told you that partners do not leave partners. Marchetti did not slow down. Now stop arguing and cover me. Despite everything, despite the blood and the pain and the enemies still climbing toward her, Yoli felt something warm spread through her chest. She was not alone. She had never been alone. She turned back to the mountain below and began providing covering fire for her spotter's ascent. The next 8 minutes were the longest of her life. Fighters continued to climb, forcing her to divide her attention between protecting Marchetti and protecting herself. Her head pounded with every shot. Her vision kept threatening to gray out. Twice she had to pause, pressing her palm against her wound, waiting for the world to stabilize before she could continue. But Marchetti kept climbing, and Yoli kept shooting. 23 kills. 25. 27. The enemy numbers were thinning, but the survivors were the most determined, the most skilled. They had watched their comrades die, and still they came, driven by faith or fury, or simply the refusal to let a single woman defeat them. 30 meters below, a fighter took aim at Marchetti. Yoli saw it happening, saw the rifle rising, saw the trigger finger tightening. She fired without thinking, without breathing, without anything except the desperate need to protect her partner. The fighter dropped. Marchetti kept climbing. 20 meters. Another fighter emerged from cover, rushing toward Yoli's position with a knife drawn, apparently out of ammunition or simply preferring to kill her with his hands. She shot him at 15 meters, watched him fall, and immediately scanned for the next threat. 10 meters. Marchetti's hand appeared over the lip of the depression. Then her face, streaked with dirt and sweat, eyes blazing with determination and relief. She pulled herself up and immediately moved to Yoli's side, taking in the blood and the wound and the exhaustion with a single practiced glance. You look terrible. You should see the other guys. Marchetti took position beside her, adding her rifle to the defense. The remaining fighters had stopped climbing, regrouping on a ledge 60 meters below. They were still dangerous, still capable of another assault, but they were also depleted and demoralized. Overwatch 2 to Viper Actual, Marchetti transmitted. We have consolidated on the peak. Enemy assault has stalled. What is your status? Okonkwo's voice came through, clearer now that the SEALs had moved away from the heaviest fighting. Viper Actual is approaching extraction point. Choppers are inbound. ETA 12 minutes. He paused. What is the status of Overwatch 1? Marchetti looked at Yoli. Wounded, but operational. She is responsible for at least 27 enemy Kia. Possibly more. The radio was silent for a moment. Then Okonkwo spoke again, and there was something different in his voice. Something that sounded like awe. Copy that, Overwatch 2. Tell Overwatch 1 that when we get back to base, she has 16 brothers who owe her their lives. Get her home safe. Yoli heard the words, but could not fully process them. The adrenaline that had kept her functioning was beginning to fade, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion that threatened to pull her under. Her vision was tunneling. Her hands were trembling. "Hey," Marchetti said sharply, gripping her shoulder. "Stay with me. You do not get to pass out until we are on that helicopter. Understand?" Yoli forced her eyes to focus. "Understood. Good." Marchetti checked her ammunition, then turned her attention to the fighters below. "Now let's make sure these idiots understand that this mountain belongs to us." Yoli adjusted her position, pressed her eye to the scope, and found her next target. The enemy had sent 70 fighters to kill 16 SEALs. They had not counted on her, and before this day was over, they would learn exactly how costly that mistake had been. The sound of helicopter rotors reached them before the aircraft appeared. 2 Black Hawks crested the eastern ridge in formation, their door gunners already scanning for threats. The cavalry had arrived. Viper actual to Overwatch elements. Okonkwo's voice crackled through the radio. "Extraction birds are on station. We are loading wounded now. What is your situation?" Marchetti keyed the response. "Enemy has pulled back to lower elevation. We have a window, but Overwatch 1 needs medical attention. Requesting extraction from peak position." There was a pause, then a different voice came through. Chalk 2 pilot speaking. "That peak is too exposed for a landing. We can hover and drop a line, but you will need to climb aboard under your own power. Can your wounded make that climb?" Yoli looked at the depression that had been her fortress for the past hour. The idea of clipping onto a cable and being hoisted into a hovering helicopter while her head pounded and her vision swam seemed impossible. But the alternative was staying on this mountain until the enemy regrouped or she bled out from the wound that had not stopped seeping. "I can make it," she said. Marchetti gave her a look that suggested she did not believe that for a second, but knew better than to argue. Chalk 2. Overwatch 2 responding. "We will be ready. Bring it in." The helicopter banked and began its approach. Below, the surviving fighters saw what was happening and opened fire, but they were too far away and too depleted to pose a real threat. The door gunner answered with a long burst that sent them scrambling for cover. The Black Hawk came to a hover 30 feet above the peak, its rotor wash threatening to tear Yoli from the mountain. A crew chief appeared in the doorway and kicked out a rope ladder that unfurled toward them. Marchetti grabbed Yoli's arm. "I'm going to help you up. Do not argue. Will not dream of it." They moved together toward the ladder. Yoli's legs felt like they belonged to someone else, weak and unsteady. Each step required concentration that she was running out of. But Marchetti was beside her, one arm around her waist, taking half her weight. The ladder swayed wildly in the rotor wash. Marchetti went first, climbing 3 rungs and then reaching down to guide Yoli's hands to the ropes. One rung at a time, Marchetti shouted over the noise. "Do not look down. Just keep climbing." Yoli climbed. Her arms burned. Her head screamed. The world tilted and spun with every movement. But she climbed. Halfway up, her grip slipped. For one terrible moment, she hung by a single hand, her body swinging over the void. Marchetti lunged downward and caught her wrist, holding her until she could find the ladder again. "I have you," Marchetti yelled. "I have you. Keep going." Yoli kept going. The crew chief grabbed her arm and hauled her into the helicopter. She collapsed on the deck, gasping, as Marchetti tumbled in beside her. The aircraft immediately banked away from the mountain, climbing toward safety. A medic was already moving toward her, cutting away fabric to examine her wound. "Looks worse than it is," he said after a moment. "Scalp laceration, probably a mild concussion. You're going to have a headache for a week, but you will live." Yoli closed her eyes. Living sounded acceptable. The flight back to FOB Resolute took 20 minutes. Yoli drifted in and out of consciousness, vaguely aware of the medic working on her wound, of Marchetti's hand gripping hers, of the rhythmic thump of rotors that meant she was going home. When the helicopter touched down, the entire base seemed to be waiting. Yoli opened her eyes to see a crowd gathered on the landing pad. SEALs from Okonkwo's team, some of them bandaged and limping. Special Forces operators who had monitored the mission from the operations center, support personnel who had heard the radio traffic. Even Colonel Whitfield stood at the edge of the crowd, his expression unreadable. Marchetti helped her to her feet. The medic tried to insist on a stretcher, but Yoli refused. She had walked onto this base under her own power, and she would walk off this helicopter the same way. The ramp lowered. Yoli stepped out into the Afghan evening. For a moment, there was silence. Then Okonkwo pushed through the crowd and stopped directly in front of her. His face was streaked with dirt and dry blood, and there was a fresh bandage on his left arm. But his eyes were clear and intense. 29 confirmed kills, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. You engaged over 70 enemy fighters from an exposed position while wounded. You held that mountain alone until your spotter reached you. He paused. My team is alive because of you. All 16 of us. Yoli did not know what to say. The words felt too big, the moment too significant for a response. Okonkwo solved the problem by extending his hand. On behalf of SEAL Team 3, thank you, Master Sergeant Achebe. He glanced back at his men. We owe you a debt we can never repay. She took his hand. Just doing my job, Lieutenant Commander. No. Senior Chief Vega stepped forward, his weathered face showing more emotion than Yoli had ever seen. That was not just doing your job. That was something else entirely. He looked at the crowd around them. Everyone here heard what happened on that mountain. Everyone here knows what you did. He turned back to Yoli. As far as I am concerned, you are one of us now. Always. A murmur of agreement rippled through the SEALs. Reinhold, the team sniper who had challenged her before the mission, pushed forward. He did not say anything. He simply nodded once, a gesture of respect that meant more than any words could convey. Colonel Whitfield approached as the crowd began to disperse. He studied Yoli for a long moment, taking in the blood and the bandages and the exhaustion that she could no longer hide. Phantom Ridge, he said quietly. I told you I brought you here because I remember what you did that night. He shook his head slowly. I think today might have surpassed it. Yoli thought about Reese, about the choice she had made 4 years ago, about the guilt she had carried ever since. Today I did not have to choose, she said. Today I saved them all. Whitfield nodded. Yes, you did. He glanced toward the operations building. There are going to be questions. Reports to file. Hensley's complaint is still pending at SOCOM. He paused. But I think after today, that complaint is going to look very different to the people reviewing it. And Hensley? The colonel's expression hardened. Chief Warrant Officer Hensley has some explaining to do. The enemy knew exactly where our team would be and exactly when they would be there. That kind of intelligence does not happen by accident. The implication hung in the air between them. Someone had leaked the mission details. Someone had set up the SEALs to die. And Hensley had been on a satellite phone the night before the operation. Yoli felt a cold anger building beneath her exhaustion. If Hensley had betrayed American soldiers to prove a point about women in combat, if he had been willing to let 16 men die to destroy her career, then he was something far worse than a bitter officer with a grudge. He was a traitor. Get some rest, Whitfield said. Medical will want to keep you under observation tonight. He turned to leave, then paused. But Master Sergeant, when you are recovered, I thank you, and I need to have a conversation about what really happened on Phantom Ridge, and about what comes next. He walked away before she could respond. Marchetti appeared at her shoulder. Come on, let us get you to medical before you fall over. Yoli let herself be led toward the aid station. But her mind was already working, already piecing together the puzzle that had nearly cost 16 men their lives. Hensley had tried to destroy her. Now she was going to destroy him. The medical station was quiet except for the hum of generators and the occasional beep of monitoring equipment. Yoli lay on a cot with fresh bandages wrapped around her head, staring at the plywood ceiling and thinking about traitors. Marchetti sat in a chair beside her, refusing to leave despite the medic's suggestions that she get some rest. You should sleep, Yoli said. So should you. But here we are. A commotion outside drew their attention. Raised voices, the sound of boots on gravel. Then the door to the medical station burst open. Chief Warrant Officer Hensley stood in the doorway, his face twisted with barely contained rage. You think you are a hero now? He spat. You think one mission changes anything? Marchetti was on her feet instantly, positioning herself between Hensley and Yoli's cot. You need to leave. Now. Or what? Hensley took a step forward. You will shoot me? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Go ahead. Give me a reason to have both of you court-martialed. Yoli sat up slowly, ignoring the spike of pain in her skull. What do you want, Hensley? I want you to know that this is not over. He jabbed a finger toward her. SOCOM will review my complaint. They will dig into your classified file. They will find whatever Whitfield is hiding. And when they do, your career is finished. Yoli studied him. The anger in his eyes was real, but beneath it she saw something else. Fear. The look of a man who sensed the ground shifting beneath his feet. You seem nervous, she said calmly. That is interesting. A man with nothing to hide would not be nervous. Hensley's expression flickered. I do not know what you are talking about. The satellite phone. The night before the mission. Yoli watched his face carefully. Who were you calling? The silence that followed was deafening. Hensley's jaw tightened. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. You do not know anything, he said, but his voice had lost its certainty. I know that someone leaked our mission parameters. I know that the enemy was waiting for us with perfect intelligence about our positions and timing. Yoli swung her legs off the cot and stood, using the bed frame for support. And I know that you have hated me since the moment I arrived. Hated me enough to file complaints, to sabotage my assignment, to do whatever it took to destroy my career. She took a step toward him. The question is whether you hated me enough to get 16 Americans killed. Hensley's face went pale. You are insane. You cannot prove anything. Maybe not yet. But Colonel Whitfield is already asking questions. The intelligence community is going to tear apart every communication that went in and out of this base in the last week. Yoli stopped directly in front of him. If there is anything to find, they will find it. And when they do, being wrong about women in combat will be the least of your problems. For a long moment, they stood face to face. Yoli could see the calculations happening behind his eyes, the desperate search for a way out of the trap that was closing around him. Then the door opened again. Colonel Whitfield entered, followed by 2 military police officers. His expression was granite. Chief Warrant Officer Hensley, he said, you are hereby relieved of duty pending investigation into potential violations of a uniform code of military justice. These officers will escort you to a secure location where you will remain until further notice. Hensley spun toward him. This is absurd. On what grounds? Whitfield's voice was ice. 30 minutes ago, we completed a preliminary review of satellite communication logs from this base. Your phone made 3 calls to a number associated with known intelligence brokers in Peshawar. The timing of those calls corresponds exactly with the leak of our operational parameters. Hensley's face went from pale to gray. That is not possible. Those records are classified. They are. Whitfield stepped closer, which is why it took direct authorization from the Secretary of Defense to access them. He paused. The same secretary who was briefed on what happened in the Korangal today. The same secretary who now has 16 living seals instead of 16 flag-draped coffins, because of the woman you tried to destroy. Hensley looked around the room like a trapped animal. His eyes found Yoli, and the hatred there was joined by something new. Desperation. Terror. You do not understand, he said, his voice cracking. They told me it would just be a warning. They said they would pin the team down, force a rescue, make Whitfield look bad for assigning her. Nobody was supposed to die. Yoli felt sick. He had known. He had known there would be an ambush, and he had let it happen anyway. You sold out American soldiers, she said quietly. For what? To prove that women do not belong in combat? Hensley's composure shattered completely. My brother died because of a woman, a female intelligence officer who was too afraid to go into the field, who relied on second-hand reports instead of doing her job. She got his entire convoy killed with her incompetence. He was shaking now, tears streaming down his face. I was trying to protect us, to protect the men who deserve to serve alongside real warriors, not diversity quotas and political appointments. The room was silent. Even the MP officers seemed frozen by the rawness of his confession. Whitfield spoke first. Your brother's death was a tragedy, Chief Warrant Officer. But it does not excuse treason. He nodded to the MPs. Take him. They moved forward and secured Hensley's arms. He did not resist. The fight had gone out of him completely. As they led him toward the door, he looked back at Yoli one final time. I was right about you, he said. You do not belong here. Yoli met his gaze without flinching. 29 dead enemies and 16 living SEALs say otherwise. They took him away. The door closed behind them, and the medical station fell silent again. Whitfield turned to Yoli. His expression had softened slightly, though the steel remained beneath the surface. The investigation will take months, he said. There will be hearings, testimony, a court-martial. Your role in exposing this will need to remain classified for now. I understand, but there is something else. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Given the circumstances, SOCOM has decided to expedite certain recognitions. This was going to wait until you return stateside, but I think you have earned the right to see it now. He opened the box. Inside, resting on white satin, was a silver star. For extraordinary heroism in combat, Whitfield said. For holding an impossible position against overwhelming odds. For saving the lives of 16 special operators through exceptional courage and skill. He closed the box and placed it in her hands. You have more than proven that you belong here, Master Sergeant. You have proven that you are one of the best we have ever seen. Yoli looked at the medal in her hands. She thought about Reese, about Phantom Ridge, about all the missions that would never be acknowledged. She thought about the 16 men who would go home to their families because she had refused to let them die. Thank you, sir, she said. But this belongs to everyone who fought today. Marchetti, the SEALs, the helicopter crews. Whitfield smiled slightly. They will receive their own recognitions. But this one is yours. He moved toward the door. Get some rest, Master Sergeant. You have earned it. He left. Marchetti moved to stand beside Yoli, looking down at the medal. A silver star, she said softly. Not bad for someone who does not belong here. Yoli closed the box and set it aside. Then she lay back on her cot and closed her eyes. For the first time in 4 years, the weight on her chest felt lighter. She had saved them all, and tomorrow she would figure out what came next. 1 week later, Yoli stood on the tarmac at FOB Resolute watching a C-130 taxi toward the runway. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the base, and the mountains that had nearly killed her rose in the distance like ancient sentinels standing guard over secrets that would never be told. Her head had healed. The stitches would come out in another few days, leaving a scar that would fade with time. The nightmares had not stopped entirely, but they had changed. Reese still visited her dreams, but now he smiled instead of bled. Now he told her she had done well. Master Sergeant Achebe. She turned to find Lieutenant Commander Okonkwo approaching with Senior Chief Vega and Petty Officer Reinhold. The 3 SEALs looked different than they had a week ago. The tension that had defined their first meeting was gone, replaced by something that felt like family. We wanted to catch you before you shipped out, Okonkwo said. The team put something together. Vega stepped forward and handed her a wooden box, smaller than a shoebox, but heavy with significance. Yoli opened it carefully. Inside was a SEAL trident. The gold insignia gleamed against black velvet, its eagle and anchor and trident and pistol representing everything that made the teams legendary. Yoli looked up confused. I am not a SEAL. No, Reinhold said, but you earned the right to carry our symbol. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was rough with emotion. Every man on that team voted. It was unanimous. As far as we are concerned, you are one of us. Now and forever. Yoli stared at the trident. She knew what this meant. SEALs did not give their insignia to outsiders. The trident was sacred, earned through suffering and sacrifice that few could imagine. For them to offer it to her was an honor beyond anything she had ever received. I do not know what to say. Okonkwo smiled. Say you will keep it, and say that if we ever need an angel on the mountain again, you will be there. Yoli closed the box and held it against her chest. Always. Vega cleared his throat. There's one more thing. He glanced at Okonkwo, who nodded. We heard about what Hensley did, about why he did it. The team talked it over, and we wanted you to know something. He stepped closer, his weathered face serious. His brother's death was not caused by bad intelligence. I knew the officer he blamed. Lieutenant Sarah Okonjo. She was one of the best intel analysts I ever worked with. The convoy that got hit ignored her warnings about the route. They thought they knew better. Vega shook his head. Hensley spent 15 years blaming a woman for a mistake that men made. He let that poison destroy him, and he almost destroyed good people because of it. Yoli processed this information. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Hensley had built his entire worldview on a lie, a convenient fiction that let him blame someone else for a tragedy that could have been prevented by listening to the very person he despised. "Thank you for telling me," she said. Okonkwo extended his hand one final time. "Take care of yourself. Whisper." That is what they are calling you now, by the way. The whole task force. Whisper, because your targets never hear you coming. Yoli shook his hand, then Vega's, then Reinhold's. No words were necessary. Everything that needed to be said had been said on a mountain, in blood and fire, and the crack of rifle shots that saved 16 lives. The SEALs walked away. Yoli watched them go, carrying the wooden box that held a piece of their legacy. A familiar voice spoke behind her. "That is quite an honor." She turned to find Colonel Whitfield approaching. He looked tired but satisfied, like a man who had finished a difficult task and could finally rest. "I did not expect it," she said. "No one ever does. That is what makes it meaningful." He stopped beside her and looked out at the mountains. Hensley's court-martial begins next month. He will likely spend the rest of his life in Leavenworth. The intelligence broker he contacted has been neutralized. The network that facilitated the ambush is being dismantled as we speak. Good. There's something else. Whitfield reached into his jacket and withdrew a folder. "Your next assignment, if you want it." Yoli took the folder but did not open it. "What is it?" "A new task force. Joint Services, highest classification. They need someone to train the next generation of special operations snipers. Someone who has done things that cannot be taught from a manual." He paused. "They specifically requested you." Yoli thought about all the years she had spent in shadows, all the missions that would never be acknowledged, all the lives she had saved and the ones she had taken. She thought about Reese, about Phantom Ridge, about the weight she had carried for so long. And she thought about the young soldiers who would come after her, the ones who would face impossible odds and impossible choices, the ones who would need someone to show them that skill and courage were not defined by gender or background or any of the artificial barriers that people like Hensley try to build. "I will do it," she said. Whitfield nodded. "I thought you might." He started to walk away, then paused. "For what it is worth, Master Sergeant, I have been in the military for 40 years. I have served with warriors from every branch and every background." He turned to face her. "You are among the finest I have ever known. What you did on that mountain will be studied at war colleges for decades. And the lives you saved by training others will multiply your legacy beyond anything you can imagine." He walked away before she could respond. Marchetti appeared a few minutes later, carrying her own deployment bag. The spotter's eyes went to the wooden box in Yoli's hands. "Is that what I think it is?" Yoli opened the box and showed her the trident. Marchetti let out a low whistle. "They gave you the bird." She shook her head in amazement. "Do you know how rare that is?" "I am starting to understand." They stood together in silence, watching the C-130 complete its taxi and turn onto the runway. The engines roared as it began its takeoff roll, climbing into the Afghan sky and disappearing toward the horizon. "So what happens now?" Marchetti asked. Yoli closed the box and tucked it carefully into her bag. "Now we go home. I recover fully, and then I start training the next generation of shooters who will hold mountains and save lives." Marchetti grinned. "Sounds boring." She paused. "You're going to need a spotter for that training program. Are you volunteering? Someone has to keep you from climbing impossible peaks and getting yourself shot." Marchetti bumped her shoulder. "Partners do not leave partners. Remember?" Yoli smiled. It was the first real smile she had allowed herself in longer than she could remember. "I remember." Their transport helicopter appeared over the eastern ridge, descending toward the landing pad. In a few hours, they would be at Bagram. In a few days, Germany. In a few weeks, home. But home was not a place anymore. Home was the woman standing beside her. Home was the seals who had given her their sacred symbol. Home was the mission that had nearly killed her and the purpose that had kept her alive. Yoli picked up her bag and walked toward the helicopter. Marchetti fell into step beside her. If this story moved you, share your thoughts about your favorite moment or character, or tell us about someone you know who proved everyone wrong. The rotor wash hit them as they approached. Yoli ducked her head and climbed aboard, settling into a seat that faced the open door. The mountains of Kunar province stretched out before her, beautiful and deadly, and forever marked by what had happened on their peaks. She had come to this place carrying the weight of a past she could not escape. She was leaving with the knowledge that some weights were not meant to be carried alone. The helicopter lifted off. The base fell away below them, and Master Sergeant Yolanda Achebe, the woman they now called Whisper, closed her eyes and let herself rest. She had proven them all wrong, and she was just getting started.